Hey everyone, Dev with Crime Hive, and we have a few updates on a few different cases that I've been covering recently. And the first one that we're going to get into is with an interview with Barry Morphew. Now, it's interesting because this interview, he did not want it to be recorded on video, did not want there to be any audio of this interview. So we do have the dialogue essentially of that interview, and I'm just going to essentially highlight what I thought was really interesting and important in that case. And then I do have an update on another one. We've been following Sidney Sutherland, who was missing and now unfortunately was considered murdered. So there is a suspect in custody. We're going to just briefly touch on that. And then I do have an update on the Washington State murders. These were two individuals murdered, dismembered, and there is a suspect in custody for that. So we're going to talk briefly about that as well. Again, if you guys like these type of true crime videos, consider subscribing to my channel. That bell notification is important because it will give you updates as I come out with more videos. Now let's talk about this here, the Barry Morphew case. Obviously, people are just astonished by the way Barry Morphew's been handling the disappearance of his wife, and has essentially been silent for, he did a brief little interview on his terms and then never spoke to the media, but he has broken that silence and has spoken to the media. So I have this report here. You may have already seen it. This is with Fox 21 News, and basically this interview talks about a few things. It's a 25-minute conversation, apparently. This is from Lauren Scharf. So she was granted exclusivity in this interview with Barry, and so she talked about this. Now, a couple things he did point out. He did mention again the possibility of an animal attack, the possible accident, auto accident, possible run-in with someone that knew her well. Right, so that was a new one that was added, is a run-in with someone that knew her well. Now, a couple other things that he had mentioned in that case were, he talked about his faith. Now, what was kind of interesting, what I found really interesting here is when you see this note, if you can see this on the left here, this was something new to me. I had not understood until this report. So he apparently went into a store. This is a manager at Poncha Market, and he goes in there looking for his wife, and he writes this note of baby blue bike helmet, and I think it says biker's clothing on it. Well, the manager thought it was really strange because this is what she says about the note. She goes, he went to write down a description of maybe what she was wearing. Butala said, I just thought it was weird because he didn't explain the color of her eyes, what color of her eyes were, or her hair, or anything about her, like how tall she was, or anything. So that's what she had to say, and that's what stuck out in her mind. So you've got someone looking for his wife, doesn't even explain what she looks like, doesn't give any information as to who she is, other than this very vague note that he writes. So that, I thought that was just really interesting from that interview. And then another interesting thing that was mentioned, and this is really the nuts and bolts of this video that I want to get into, is in regard to the lie detector test, right? The polygraph. And a couple things on that. So in an earlier interview, Suzanne's family told Fox 21 right here that CBI agents asked Barry to take a polygraph test on two separate occasions, and that each time he turned them down. Don't know if that's true. Don't know if that's false. Not sure. Barry, on the other end, says, I've never been asked to do a polygraph. He says, there's nothing I'm hiding. I've given 3 to 30 hours of testimony to the FBI and the CBI, which is the criminal investigative unit. Basically, it's the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. It's kind of like the FBI, but for the state of Colorado. So he says that I've answered every single question. Now, then you've got this private investigator chiming in, who's saying that it's not, it's possible that those agencies didn't ask Barry to take a polygraph. So and it is reasonable for an innocent person to deny the test. Now, It's interesting. That's true. You certainly do not need to take a polygraph, even if you're asked by law enforcement. And the reason being, it's just simply not admissible in court. Now, there are some really interesting things that you can learn from a polygraph test. Now, if Barry were to take a test, what do you all think? Do you think he would pass the test? And we're going to talk about kind of the psychology and the science behind that a little bit. That's really what I wanted to do in this video. But what are your thoughts on that test if he were to take it? What do you think would stick out? Now, a couple things that I specifically want to mention here is, again, lie detector tests not admissible in court. And I found this article here. This is a really good one that just this is from apmreports.org, talks about lie detector tests as well. And the science just really isn't there. A lot of people think it's equivalent to flipping a coin, as being able to accurately determine if someone's being deceptive or not. And this kind of breaks it down, and I really like the explanation of this. So I'm just going to explain a couple parts of this. Now, what this article talks about is, this is back in the 1920s, right? This was invented by a man named John Larson. He was actually a medical student at the University of California, and he was also a police officer who eventually withdrew support for his own invention. So he doesn't even really believe in his own invention, according to this. Now, what he says is a person is placed in a chair. So just to give you an idea of how this is operating, if you were to do a lie detector test, if you've been a part of a polygraph, even for your employment, you might have gone through that. I've gone through those before, and not for anything criminal, just for employment, things like that. And it is interesting. It is an interesting process. So what's happening is you're hooked up. Your fingers are hooked up to measure your sweat, to measure, and then you've got there's a cuff that goes around your arm to measure the blood pressure. And then you've got these straps that go around your abdomen and your chest, and that's to measure breathing. So you have these charts, used to be on paper graphs and all that. Now it's all electronic, so they can do it through a computer. And what happens is they read these changes, these readings from your answers. They're trying to find out if you're telling a lie or if you're telling the truth based on these readings, essentially. So it doesn't really tell you if someone's lying. And here's what it goes to explain a little bit too, is everybody behaves differently. The premise is that people behave differently and predictably when they lie, but that's not necessarily the case. This goes on to talk about that if you look at the record and say the blood pressure increases when asked this question, it could be for multiple reasons. So if somebody's blood pressure goes up, it could be because of hypoglycemia, fear, confusion, PTSD, nervousness, alcohol withdrawal, psychosis, and general anxiety. So there's so many different reasons that you can have different readings on these tests. So it's so hard to tell if someone is lying or not, right? Now, I will say this about those tests. Those tests, if someone has been given that test, it has generated confessions. It is almost its own interrogation, and it can give investigators very good information. And even so much so that on these readings, if there is a spike on one of these questions, it may give an investigator an idea that, hey, maybe I'm in the right direction. Maybe I need to go down this rabbit hole a little bit further and maybe find out more information about this. So it can help with certain aspects of a case, but again, not admissible in court. It's really just a tool. It's a tool to help investigators, and so I just wanted to point that out. And then really that article, I found some other ones here, and just to give you some more information on lie detectors, because I just think this is really interesting, and I know a lot of people have asked questions about this. People have been known to pass these quite often, and what's interesting is from a lot of these different studies, it seems like people who are hardened criminals or people that have been around the system and been been involved in the criminal courts and kind of understand this process, they can easily pass a polygraph. And then you've got people that have never committed a crime. They're going in for the first time, high anxiety. They have no idea what's going on. They're, confusion. People like that have been known to fail these tests. Innocent people who had nothing to do with a crime, and they failed these tests. So one notable example, if you guys are familiar with the Green River Killer, very notable, operated around the Green River, which is in Washington State, around Seattle area, Tacoma, those areas, and killed many women. But anyway, he passed the polygraph test, and then they asked him questions, and they actually brought in innocence. So this was an innocent person. I don't know if you guys remember this. His name was Melvin Wayne Foster. He actually failed the polygraph test in relation to this case. So they thought that he was potentially involved. Meanwhile, Ridgway goes out and kills other people before he's ultimately convicted in this case. Now, just thought that was interesting, kind of geeking out on this part here with the questions and all that sort of stuff. So I've got the list of the questions that they asked him. And what they did is he was twice asked a series of 9 questions. And that's actually very common. I think I remember with one of my polygraph tests, I was asked maybe 3 times the same questions. And I think they were just in a different order, but they said the same questions, and I had to answer those 3 different times. And I think they were in a different order. But on this, the questions that they asked him, just to give you an idea, number 1, Gary, have you heard all the questions on this test? Are there any you are going to lie to? No. Number 2, regarding the deaths of prostitutes, have you told the police the complete truth about that? Yes. Is your true last name Ridgway? Yes. Have you ever caused the death of a prostitute? No. Before you were 30 years old, did you ever physically injure anyone without a provocation? No. Were you born in the state of Utah? Yes. Do you know of anyone who has killed a prostitute? No. Before you were 30 years old, did you ever lie about someone to get them into serious trouble? No. And question number 9 was, have you taken any illegal drug or narcotic in the last 48 hours? No. Now, that was interesting. So those were the questions they asked him. Really interesting case. And, going off topic a little bit here, I'm probably going to do a series on Gary Ridgway down the road here. I know it's not something that's current or active, but it is a very fascinating case to look into and a lot of information on there that we can cover. So the other thing that I wanted to mention on the polygraph, I'm going to show you guys a quick clip on that as well, just to give you more information, because I think it's important for people to understand how a polygraph works, the real aspects of these types of cases, or what a polygraph can do and what it can't do, and the science and psychology behind that. So this site's really big on obviously being against the polygraph. It's called antipolygraph.org, but there is a lot of good information on this site if you're interested in reading about that. I just thought I would show you guys this resource because it has all sorts of different cases, lawsuits, documents, articles dealing with the lie detector. And it just gives a lot of different examples. I think you can even download this free PDF book with it, I believe. So just a lot of information in general about the polygraph. Now, the last part I want to mention here before I go into the other case that we're talking about next is this quick little video that I found on a polygraph expert that shows you how to beat a lie detector test. So this information's out there, for anybody that is being arrested, being charged with a crime. This information is just scattered all over, and I just don't think it would be useful for someone to partake in a polygraph. That's just my opinion right now, other than the information I told you with being able to potentially get a confession out of it and maybe utilize an area that showed deception where investigators can maybe hone in on that specific aspect. But I'm going to play this real quick and just get you guys some more information on the polygraph. And let's start this right here. If you guys want to turn up your volume a little bit there. So this guy's been doing it for quite a while. Spent 35 years speaking against the polygraph. I just found this video interesting about it.
Fear has a definite, distinct smell, a combination of shit and spinach. For 7 years, I would smell that fear every day in my office. It was there when I closed up the office every night, and it was there to greet me the next morning when I entered the office.
I should move this over.
Polygraph is not a test. It's an intense interrogation, and the only part the polygraph plays is to frighten and intimidate a person into making a confession or an admission. It doesn't record truth or deception. There is no such thing as a lying reaction. It records nervousness. The reaction that would brand you as a liar only indicates deception about 50% of the time. Anybody can pass any lie detector test by simply duplicating the physiological response to fear on demand at the appropriate time. What the polygraph records is your blood pressure, your pulse rate. It also shows what's called the galvanic skin response. That's where electrodes are placed on the first and third fingers of your right hand, and it records the sweat activity in your hand. Then there are pneumograph tubes placed around your chest and stomach that record your breathing. Any number of innocent stimuli can and do cause the exact same reaction that would brand you as a liar. And the more well-developed your sense of conscience, the more likely you are to flunk a polygraph examination, and the more of an old thief and the more hardened your conscience, the better your chances of passing it. Take a quarter out of your pocket and flip that sucker. If it's heads, they're lying. If it's tails, they're telling the truth. That's exactly the same degree of accuracy that this polygraph instrument has.
It's pretty interesting. And then apparently he started teaching people early on how to beat these exams. Very widely against it, and he was in law enforcement and did this. Conducted several.
In order to pass a polygraph examination, you have to understand how polygraph is scored. There are two different types of questions, relevant and control. Now, the relevant questions are obviously those that pertain to the point at issue. Is your first name Jenna?
Yes.
Did you tell the complete truth on your job application?
Yes.
Control questions then are interspersed. Have you ever stolen anything? Have you ever lied to anyone who trusted you? Besides what you've told me, have you ever lied to get out of trouble?
No.
You have to show no reaction whatsoever on the relevant questions. Is your first name Jenna? That's your first relevant. Nice and calm and even, no major fluctuations at all. And you have to show a reaction on the control questions, because what they do is they compare your reactions. Now here's your first control question. See how high that GSR went, how erratic the breathing? You can tell that. Take that across the street and you can tell which question bothered you.
Yeah.
And here's relevant again. Nice and calm, nice and calm, nice and calm. Now how do you do this? So utterly simple. On all the relevant questions, you think about laying on the beach and watching the waves gently rolling into the shore. Thinking nice, calm, relaxing thoughts. Is there anything in your background that would disqualify you from getting this job?
No.
On the control questions, you think about falling off of a building and smashing your guts out on the sidewalk below. Besides what you've told me, have you ever stolen anything else?
No.
Thinking of that frightening scenario induces a stress reaction that causes a reaction on the control questions. No reaction on the relevance, reaction on the controls. Pass.
So that's interesting. So I just thought I'd show that little clip there and see if I can stop that now. There we go. Okay. So really interesting. And the last thing regarding the polygraph that I wanted to point out here was, as I was doing more research on this here, this guy from NSA apparently had some insights on this. And this is a U.S. News article. And he was talking about, how he didn't really believe in polygraphs as well, and how easy it is to pass them, and how everybody at the office knew how simple it was because they would be given these polygraph tests often throughout their employment because they're in such a high security type of field. Now, he would say, his name's Tice. He says to trick the tester, a person should lie in response to these questions like most other people would, but also bite their tongue hard while doing so, which will set off other physiological reactions in the body. So he's saying that the testers needles will fly everywhere, and he will think this guy is really Nelly. He has a strong physical reaction when he's lying. And he says that it's skewing the test, apparently, if you're biting your tongue hard. I don't know if this works. I've never tried this, but I just thought it was interesting that... and then he goes on to say, similar aspect, that if you're thinking about a summer night or drinking a beer, something that calms you, that it's going to throw the test off. And then, just really just changing your thoughts in your mind to react the way that you would like to on these tests. So pretty fascinating, really. And I didn't want to go too far into this, and I know this is I've talked quite a bit about the polygraph, but I think that's the real basis of this video. And then going back to Barry Morphew, though, a couple other things that really stuck out with this case is he seemed to really be blaming everything else but himself in this. And then what I gathered, he did mention that he did apparently he had misinterpreted the information about his bobcat when he said, this was about the inconsistency on the timeline when he was using his bobcat. He said, it was only because I didn't know the time that I did something, a mechanical thing, to my bobcat. He said, I was confused and I just found out my wife was missing, and I was a little bit not in my right mind when they were asking me these questions. But I did the best I could, and I answered everything. I never once declined any interview, is what he says. And then a couple other aspects here. He, the blaming part that I really found interesting is he talked about the sheriff's department screwing up the whole thing from the beginning, he says, and now they're trying to cover it up and blame it on me. He went on to cite the incident he found particularly troubling, which was referring to the wife's bike. So he says that his buddy was there and that the police completely destroyed the evidence, and that he tried to stop them, but they wouldn't listen to him. And so he basically said the evidence was completely obliterated by the sheriff's department. So again, just continues to blame other people and just very defensive, which again can be a red flag. Again, I'm not saying he's guilty or innocent. I just find that really interesting. What do you think about those segments? If you were to go to this article and read through that, I'll probably provide a link for that as well, and you guys can read through that. There's a lot of information through Fox 21 News because they've been covering this really well, so kudos for them on that. And then that's really the update I had on the Barry Morphew case. And then I'm going to give an update quickly here on the Sidney Sutherland murder. Really sad. I put out a video on that recently, and you guys have followed that. And, we all, of course, hoped for a good outcome. But apparently she was murdered by this man right here. His name is Quake Lewellyn, if that's how I'm saying his last name right. And still waiting for the arrest affidavit. That'll most likely come Monday, so we can get more details, more information about this case. But a couple things that we do know about him. I'm just looking at this article from Heavy, and they mentioned that he was 28 years old. He was a farmer. Apparently, third generational farmer. And they talk about this here, where he always worked on this farm. Apparently they had a lot of land around the area, and including, the areas where Sidney lived. They had farmland in Jonesboro, which again, when I did that video, I mentioned that other case with another woman around that area who was attacked from behind and knocked unconscious. I still wonder if that is in any way related to this case. I don't know. Still don't have the information on that. You can go and watch that video as well, and if you're not sure what I'm talking about on that. But he goes to talk about that. This is what he looks like. Apparently he didn't, he knew Sidney on Facebook. They had some sort of connection. I don't know exactly what it is. They were familiar, it mentions, and then apparently he was married. So there's social media filled with information that he has a spouse, that he was married, how much he loves his spouse. Not a lot of, red flags as far as, him going through a divorce or any issues that were going on in his life, as far as I know at this point, as we're still learning more. But, that might be his wife right there, who's blocked out. So not a lot of information on that. Again, people posting about the interesting meme that Sidney had mentioned, that if I'm ever murdered, just know I ran my mouth to the bitter end. She had posted that on social media, and still learning about this, but I just wanted to give the update on that. Really sad, really heartbreaking to hear about that, to hear about this man and what he may have done. Still gonna wait for those arrest records before I go into another video on the details on that. So just stay tuned for that information. Now, the last thing that I want to point out here in this video is we have another update on the Washington State dismembered couple. And I did a video on that a while back. If you watched that, there was a very viral TikTok video where these group of teenagers found a suitcase off the beach in West Seattle, Alki Beach. They found a suitcase. They actually opened it up, found plastic bags. Those plastic bags had the remains of this couple here that were murdered. And what we found out here is that from this, there was a 62-year-old suspect. Okay, and just so you remember, I'll mention the victims again in this case. You've got 35-year-old Jessica Lewis, 27-year-old Austin Wenner, and they were tenants. And so what I've learned here is they were tenants, and the landlord was the 60-year-old suspect from Burien, and his name was, and I have it in another article here, his name is actually Michael Dudley. He's got a bail set at $5 million. He was arrested, still waiting for the charging documents and all that information to come, which would be next week as well. And what we learned really from this is really interesting. Apparently, there was a night where neighbors reported hearing an argument between people. I don't think they knew if it was specifically between the landlord and the couple, but there was tension between them because the couple was struggling to come up with rent money. And so what happened is a neighbor actually called 911, and the Burien police responded to the residents. Now, what we learn is no one came to the door. Okay, so it must have been quiet at that time. And what's interesting is even when police are called to a residence, if they don't have any emergent circumstances to force their way in a property or anything like that, typically they just can't do anything. They're going to knock on the door. If it's quiet, they don't see any evidence of a crime, there's no urgency there, they're just going to walk away, and that's the end of it. So apparently that's what happened in this case. And what's really weird is they apparently had heard gunshots and heard someone say, "Please don't do this, just leave, just let me leave." And so that was the information that was coming when this 911 call came in. Another witness apparently said he went to the home later that same night and reported seeing a bloody arm sticking out under a pile of clothes. So really interesting here. But again, police didn't have the information to go in there at that time. Now, investigators, I learned from this article that they did confront the landlord, and he ended up admitting that he did fight with the couple because they were short on the rent, but he denied anything else. Then investigators go in, they actually find evidence of blood and bullet holes in the room where the couple stayed, and they ultimately had enough information to arrest the landlord for it. So it's still evolving. Don't know a lot of information. I'm not going to give too much on this because it's still ongoing, and I'm very curious to learn more of the details as well. So just stay tuned for that as I come out with another video. And I appreciate you sticking with me this long. If you have, consider subscribing to my channel. This is Dev with Crime Hive, and I will be back with another video soon. Y'all take care.